So I'm sure you've heard the news by now, Harman releasing Phoenix in 120 format, and this is something that I was really hoping was going to happen after the original 35mm launch, and it is exciting to see this released and to see Harman continue to develop this film. And I'll say right now, before getting into the video, the larger negative definitely helps settle this film down a little bit, and to me it almost feels like a little less experimental now. So Harman sent me a handful of rolls a couple months back, and I took them with me on a few different travel trips, and then I also headed out to a car show here in the UK to shoot some 120 format alongside the 35mm version. So today I'm going to share the results and my thoughts on this film, show you the comparisons between the 120 and 35 images that I shot, talk about an updated lab scanning method that works really well. It's something that I actually had done this time, and then also show you some comparisons between lab scans and the scans that I did here at home, and then wrap it all up talking about how I would approach shooting this film and kind of some final thoughts. So let's get into it. So I made a video about the 35mm version shortly after the launch last year, and I was incredibly excited when I heard Harman was going to be making a new color film, but the film itself was just a bit too heavy for me. It had quite a strong look to it, and it was also pretty sensitive to underexposure, and overall just felt a little bit experimental. You know, none of that was really surprising though. Harman was pretty upfront when they released Phoenix, just saying that it was a work in progress and that it wasn't really going to behave like most other color negative films. And from my tests, I found that rating it at 100 rather than 200 seemed to work better. At 200, the shadows just were a little bit thin. And then it also seems like it responds best to camera scanning or digitizing at home and doing a conversion process through Photoshop or with a plugin like Negative Lab Pro. You know, a lot of the results we would see from lab scanners, it seemed like they were struggling with the conversion process and just kind of putting out these images that were really kind of strong and contrasty. But regardless, you know, I did have high hopes that we would see Phoenix, you know, keep evolving and hopefully become a little bit more refined and polished. So I shot a total of 5 rolls of Phoenix 200, and then I actually sent these off for development this time instead of doing it here at home. And I sent them to Harman's lab here in the UK. They developed, and then they actually scanned them as well using their Frontier with a bit of a different process, which I'll talk about after. And then I got the film back and I scanned or digitized it here at home as well using my GFX setup. And I'm going to share all that with you. But I will say right off the bat, as a bit of an overview, that the images I shot with this film just look a bit more refined than the 35mm version. And because of that, I enjoyed it quite a bit more. So the overall look is obviously the same when it comes to the colors, as this is the same film, but you get the benefits that come with the bigger negative. So the images are sharper, the tones are a little bit smoother, there's a bit more detail to be found in the shadow and highlight areas, and then the halation is a little bit more tame as well. And as much as it still has that Phoenix look and colors, which can be quite strong, it feels much more usable, at least for my preferences. And you know, after doing the original video with the 35mm version, I never went and shot any more of that format just because the grain was a little bit too heavy, the images lacked detail, the halation could be overpowering. So this version definitely helps with all of that. But let's jump on the computer now. We'll start by taking a look at some of these 35 and 120 comparisons, and then we'll go from there. All right, so jumping into this, we'll start here. Like I said, some comparisons. So we have the 120 version here. And if we do a comparison view, I'll put 35 on the right. I'm going to 100%, 120 format, same with the 35. And you can see right away, you know, as expected, the 6x7 negative is going to look way better than the 35. There's a big size difference. But with Harman 35, like I said, with that smaller format, I found the grain was always really strong, and in the areas of fine detail, it was almost like chunky. You could never really get like a nice sharp final scan, whereas obviously with a 6x7 negative, that helps quite a bit, and you can see the difference between the two. This version looks quite a bit more detailed, and you know, it's helping Phoenix be this film now that you can get pretty clean results with it, if that's what you're after. I know some people out there are going to say, I don't care about sharpness and I don't care about grain, but for me, if I was going to use this, This is looking so much nicer and something I enjoy quite a bit more compared to this 35mm version. And I'll show a couple more examples here. So this is 120. We'll just make sure this loads up. So huge files. So 120 here. And then this is the 35mm version. We'll go into 100 as well. So it doesn't look too bad, but again, there is quite a big difference between the two of these when you look at them. Even if we go into like this grill area, so much more detail can be seen. So quite a bit nicer. And then one more here. This will be a good example. So again, I'll just make sure this loads up. So put the 120 on the left and then 35 on the right. And there's a pretty big difference between the two of these. The 35 stuff I shot with a Contax RTS2 with a Zeiss Distagon 35mm 2.8. So a great lens. And even still, you can see there's a drastic difference between the two. So yeah, it goes from a 35 format Phoenix that I wouldn't have used because I wasn't happy with the final detail you could pull, to now it being something that is quite a bit more capable in my opinion. So next up I want to talk about halation. We can even start with these two here. So again, it's the same film. It's still going to have the same characteristics, but it is much more well controlled with this format. You can see where we have this bright sunlight here. It's still there with the 120 version, but it's better controlled. It's almost like the halation doesn't spread as much. And I also found with the 35 format, it almost felt like it had more like global halation. You'll see in some areas where there's a lot of bright spots, it's almost everywhere. This one's a good example too. So we'll put 120 on left, 35 on right whenever it loads. You can see up here by the trees, a little bit more here in the 35 format compared to this one. Even as we get down here, you can see it kind of blooms a lot more. But this example right here is a good one talking about global halation. So 120 format, and then 35 on right. And if you look at this kind of car area, this white car, and even around these doors, you can see it has this like red glow, the whole area does. It's really subtle, but it's there. And it's almost non-existent on the 120 format here. So yeah, much better controlled. And that was a big downside for me with the original test that I did. This is one of the images from that first video. You can see around the horizon line, around the roof here where it meets the sky, it's really, really heavy. Same thing here with this, bright roof on the car and around the building. Just a little bit too unpredictable. And I personally don't like going out to shoot with something like this and kind of not knowing if it's going to be too much or if it's going to look fine. So yeah, with this 120 version, you can see bright sunlit day, little bit of a glow here maybe, but nothing too crazy, even on these bright areas here. Same with this one, this is like pure midday sun hitting everything, like side lighting the scene. And it's pretty well controlled. And even this one here again, super bright sunlight, maybe a little bit here, a little bit of like a red glow, but very, very different to what we saw with those other examples I showed you from that first video. Okay, then the last thing to point out between these, and this one's a little bit more subtle to show you, but it's just almost like the smoothness of the tones or the detail that is found in those really kind of deep areas. This one might be a good one. So 120 on left, going to 100, and then 35 on right. You can see there's almost like this indent, like this guttering on the bumper here that you can see in this format. Whereas if you look on the 35 version, it's almost like it all just turns into this black blob here, the whole entire bumper. You're losing those little kind of like subtle tone changes in the dark areas. And actually, if we go back to this one, this is a really good example of it. So we'll put 120 on left, 35 on right. And if we go down here to where the bumper kind of meets this tire, we'll do the same here on the 35 version. You can see on this one, it's almost like the tire and the bumper almost turn into one because you're losing again those fine kind of subtle tonal changes. Whereas Here on the 120 version, you can actually see like the edge of the bumper carry all the way down. So again, these are all things you expect as you start going to a bigger negative size, but you know, all of these things, the sharpness you can get from the film, the halation being a little bit better controlled, the fine detail and those subtle tone changes in dark areas, all of that, at least for me, makes Phoenix into a film that feels much more usable, and yeah, not as heavy. It's something that you could go out with and for the most part, I think, like, get pretty nice clean results with in most situations. Okay, so the other thing I wanted to show quickly is just when it comes to scanning. As mentioned, I redid all of these with my GFX setup, but I did have Harman scan them using their Frontier, and they reached out to me and they said that they'd been working on a different process. One of the things that the older scanners seem to struggle with is the lack of an orange mask and then the conversion process, and that was leading, like I said, to super contrasty and really punchy results. We saw such a wide variety of looks from Phoenix when it was first released, but what Harman did is they actually scanned this as a positive on the Frontier and then took that into Photoshop and inverted it and did an auto color correction, and that was it. Those are the results that they sent me. So they're basically bypassing the conversion process through the Frontier and doing it themselves. And as you'll see, this is one of the scans right here. This is with my edits, but if I go back to the original, let's see if I can do this here. We'll remove my edits. So this is how the scan showed up to me. And this is with a few adjustments. So you can see it's way more neutral, quite a bit of room still to edit with. Again, this is one of the Frontier scans. This is before any edits right here. And Frontiers are pretty contrasty as it is, but yeah, any of the lab scans I saw in the past, this would have been like all blocked up in like crazy colors, even with this one here. So this is what I got from them. And this is with a few edits. So it is interesting to see, you know, if we put the GFX beside it, obviously I've gone and edited this a bit, but so much more neutral than anything we saw in the past. Again, GFX on left, Frontier scan on the right, huge difference in the reds. Some of this comes down to the editing process. But obviously this method has really tamed things down a lot, so it's cool to see them do that. I'm curious if other labs will implement that. Obviously way more involved than just doing like an auto conversion on a roll of film. I don't think it's gonna be feasible for a lot of places to like take every single image and invert them manually. But regardless, you need to see Harman experiment and try and find better methods to get the best out of this film. Okay, so when it comes to how to best work with Phoenix 200, if you missed my original video, like I said, I did an exposure test in that one, and what I found is that at ISO 200, the shadows seemed a little bit thin with this film, but going down to ISO 100 really helped with that, even though the colors were like a little less punchy. But that's what I would do, just setting my meter to 100 and just being really conscious when you're metering. This isn't your typical color negative film, and the shadows will start to fall apart pretty quickly, or you'll lack density there in the negative. And then the second thing is when it comes to scanning, like we saw, it seems to respond really well to digitizing with the camera and then a conversion process in Photoshop or Lightroom with something like Negative Lab Pro. Or if you are gonna go and work with a lab, you know, choose one that has worked with Phoenix and kind of has a workflow to get the best results. Otherwise, you know, if you just send this off anywhere, there's a good chance you're gonna get like really contrasty scans back. So overall, you know, excited to see this come out in 120 format. Very curious to see where it'll go next. But for me personally, I'm a pretty big fan of like more subtle films like a Portra 160 or even Gold 200 and 120 format I've been shooting a lot of. So I don't know how much Phoenix I would shoot moving forward, but I will say now this 120 version is something that I wouldn't hesitate to shoot if I had a few rolls and I had like a subject that suited it well. Just knowing that if you approach this properly, you can get quite nice results, and it doesn't look, like I said, as experimental as the smaller format. So yeah, curious to see where they go next. I'd love to see a 4x5 version and see what that looks like, but even just more refinements to the film itself. Who knows? I mean, Harman seems obviously very dedicated to this, so I'm sure we'll see other iterations hopefully in the near future. But anyways, hope you enjoyed my look at Phoenix 120. And that's it for this one. Just want to say thank you for watching. I'll talk to you soon.